Thank you all for coming for the last seminar for this year. I just want to remind us after the seminar we will have our almost weekend gathering also with food. So you're welcome there after that. And we will start with Ori, with the prize, and then go on to Shaked's talk.
So I'll just take a couple of minutes of your time. I'm delighted to award this year's Means Prize for Excellence in Atmospheric Studies to Ofer Cohen. So, if you want to say something, it's okay. But
I would just say thanks to the committee and to Ori, my advisor. That's it. Thank you.
So there's no clear protocol on how this ceremony is supposed to go. I'll just say a few words. I was not in the committee, as I'm Ofer's advisor in his master's studies, so I was not part of the committee, but the committee decided he's very well deserving of this prize, and I'll just say Ofer is really a dream. Oh, sorry. The kind of student that advisors dream about. He was an excellent student in his bachelor's degree, and then as a master's student, he was able to actually master so many methods: meteorology, oceanography, synoptic analysis, machine learning, numerical modeling of the WRF model. Really, really impressive stuff. He already has a published paper as a co-author and has now submitted a paper following his research in his master's thesis. So very impressive, and I hope we see here Ofer again after he comes back from his PhD in Oxford. So good luck.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming for Shaked's presentations of her PhD. First of all, I want to thank the committee for joining us in such a brief notice. First of all, Michael Sosowski, Gidi Ber, and Ben Andre Meir from ETH, who joined us in the Zoom. So thank you very much. Shaked Engelberg, she completed her master's and BSc in Tel Aviv University in geophysics, where she worked on the southern segment of the Dead Sea Fault using PaleoMag, right? She dated the evolution of this part of this basin. And then she continued working on the Dead Sea Fault from a different angle, from seismology. She started her PhD in the Hebrew University with a collaboration with the Geological Survey of Israel, specifically the Seismological Division. And she did an amazing job there. She got several awards for her remarkable work. And I'm very pleased to welcome Shaked for her talk. So welcome.
So thank you everyone for coming. I also want to thank my supervisors, Nadav and Amot, for their guidance and support throughout this study. So today I'm going to present the main findings of my PhD thesis. Its title is Characterizing the Dead Sea Fault System with Advanced Seismological Techniques and an Extended Catalog. And so my study spans from a global scale, where I compare the Dead Sea plate boundary with other strike-slip plate boundaries around the globe. And it gradually zooms into local seismicity patterns along the Dead Sea Fault and down to the scale of micro-seismicity. And so I would like to begin with a general observation of the Israeli catalog. This is a 40 years catalog, and we can see that already at first glance, we see several features that catch the eye. And these features led me to ask several questions that I will answer throughout this talk. So first of all, earthquakes occur along faults. However, they also occur at a certain width surrounding the fault. And so the first question I ask is, what controls this width? Second, we can see that earthquakes are not evenly distributed along the faults. We have areas where seismicity is increased and other that present sparse activity. So the second question is, what controls the distribution of earthquakes along the Dead Sea Fault? And third, are these areas of increased seismicity maybe tell us something regarding the fault's strength? Are there areas along the fault that their strength is reduced? So the third question is, can we identify variation in the fault strength based on seismicity patterns? And I add here the term fault susceptibility that I will explain in detail later on. And so in order to start and answer the first question, what defines the seismogenic width, I will take a step back from the Dead Sea plate boundary, as this question is actually very basic and general. What controls the fault zone seismogenic width of strike-slip plate boundaries? And so we can see here the San Andreas Fault and its clear appearance on the surface. And seismicity, in contrast, has a range of occurrence. So we ask here, what controls this width, and across what distance is seismicity actually associated with a single fault? And so a previous study already addressed this question, and it defines the seismogenic width based on the earthquake density as a function of the normal distance from the fault. And in this study, the focus was the San Andreas fault system, and it was separated into segments that were grouped into categories according to their characteristics. And for each category, the density functions were stacked, and a function was fitted to the data, and according to this fit, the seismogenic width was determined. So we see here a stack of the category that was labeled large faults in Southern California, but of course, such analysis was performed for each category. And the main conclusions were that the seismogenic width measured for faults in Southern California is twice wider than in Northern California, and we talk about 6 kilometers as opposed to 3 kilometers. And the second observation was that the seismogenic width decreases with cumulative offset. And so we wanted to understand if this observation is consistent with other strike-slip plate boundaries. And also we added some additional steps that better constrain the seismogenic width, and we'll see it right away. And so we added 3 plate boundaries to the analysis: the North Anatolian Fault, the Dead Sea Fault, and the East Anatolian Fault. And we, like in the previous study, separated the faults into segments according to these criteria. We chose segments that are seismically active. We try to avoid intersections with adjacent large faults, and we wanted to work with segments of similar depth, similar size, sorry. And so we can see here plate boundaries with various characteristics. We have older faults versus younger faults. We have slow slipping faults, like the Dead Sea Fault versus fast slipping faults. And so we think that if one of these features significantly influence the seismogenic width, we should really see it here. And so, like in the previous study, we also defined the seismogenic width based on the earthquake density as a function of the distance from the fault. But we did not fit a function, but determined a threshold of 30% from peak. And according to this threshold, we determined the seismogenic width. And so this is an example for one segment in the San Andreas Fault. We smoothed the data, and according to our threshold, define the seismogenic width. And here is another example from the North Anatolian Fault and another from the Dead Sea Fault. And we can starting to see here differences. However, we do see that the pattern is relatively similar. We see peak close to the fault and a gradual decay from the peak. However, not all segments showed us this pattern. There were segments that showed this trend. And when we tried to understand why, we found that if an anomalous activity took place close to the fault, it dominated the trend and caused this bias. We also saw that if anomalous activity, such as large event, occurred on the fault, it triggered lots of aftershocks and also dominated the pattern. And so in this stage, we understood that we maybe want to remove distinct anomalous activities that dominate the density patterns. And so we activated a clustering algorithm on every catalog, and we plotted again the density pattern for the two populations. The populations are clusters, events that are close in space and time, and background seismicity, which are events that are relatively distant in space and time. And you can see that for the background events, we do see the expected pattern of this peak and gradual decay. And the cluster here indeed dominated the data and increased the seismogenic width. So at this stage, we found that the background seismicity better reflects the ongoing activity on the fault, and we want to remove anomalous activities and distinct clusters. And so the next thing that we wanted to understand is how the seismogenic width varies with depth. This is the flower structure. It's a typical structure that was observed on strike-slip faults. It was described in many geophysical and geological works. And we can see here that the structure shows localization at depth and scattering of the fault close to the surface. And so at this stage, we separated the seismogenic depth of each segment into two depth intervals, a shallow one and a green one. And we analyzed the density pattern for each of these segments. So the shallow interval is marked with orange and the deep with green. And remember these colors for the next slides. And so here we got rather interesting results. We saw that for 11 segments in 3 plate boundaries, we see in the deep part similar patterns and similar seismogenic width, ranges from 3 to 5 kilometers. In the shallow patterns, we see various patterns and a wide range of the seismogenic width, sizes, sorry. And so we find here that the seismogenic width indeed highly sensitive to the structure. We can see that for most segments, the seismogenic width increases at the shallow part and is localized and the seismogenic width decreases for the deep part. We have a segment that shows the opposite, and another 2 segments where we see similar seismogenic width for 2 depth intervals. And we interpret this as kind of a sharp fault, knife fault, we call it. And so we find here that we maybe defined the seismogenic width of a single fault, and in order to do it, we had to focus on the deep part where the fault is localized. And so one of the best examples for the sensitivity of the seismogenic width to structure is the Dead Sea Basin. Here we even divided the seismogenic depth into 3 intervals, and we see how at greater depth the seismogenic width decreases until in the deepest part it shows the pattern and the width of a single fault. So to sum the results until now, we saw that for most segments, the seismogenic width decreases with depth. And we had also these two segments that showed the sharp structure, the similar seismogenic width for both depth intervals. And I talked until now about 3 plate boundaries, and I did not yet show the results for the East Anatolian Fault, which failed to show us the expected pattern at each step of the work. And when we turned to the literature to try and understand this result, we found that indeed events are scattered along a large band of faults and is not localized on the main East Anatolian Fault. And so this picture is actually reflected in our analysis as well. We see here this band of faults, which really is a wide seismogenic width. And so to conclude, using the fault zone seismogenic width, we were able to classify strike-slip plate boundaries into localized and segmented faults. For the case of localized faults, we found that seismogenic width decreases with depth to a relatively narrow damage zone of 3 to 5 kilometers. And we can see here the structures and their corresponding density patterns. And so this was about the seismogenic width. And I will now move forward to the second question. What controls the distribution of earthquakes along the Dead Sea Fault? And in order to answer this question and highlight areas of increased seismicity, I can actually use once again here the clustering algorithm that separate the catalog into these two populations: the clusters, events that are relatively close in space and time, and background events, which are relatively distant. And so here we can see on a 2-dimensional histogram these two populations. We can see on the left the clusters and on the right the background seismicity. And here on the pie diagram we see the percentage of each population. We can see that the background events represent more than 50% of the catalog, and we have here the clusters split into main shocks and aftershocks, where the main shocks are the largest events in each cluster. And so this is the distribution. How does it look schematically on time? We have the background events, which are sparser in time, and they are also relatively smaller in magnitude. And more infrequently, we have a main shock, the trigger aftershocks, and this main shock is relatively larger. And this sequence is usually closer in space and time. And after the sequence decays, we go back to the background activity. So we started from this picture, activated the clustering algorithm, and then we got this figure that shows us clusters, each cluster represented by different colors, and the background seismicity in black. And this figure already shows us many interesting results. We can see that northern to the Dead Sea Basin, clusters are shifting from the plate boundary to the western branches. We can also see that clusters in the Dead Sea Basin occur on the east side of the basin. We have areas along the Arava Fault where clusters are concentrated. And regarding background seismicity, we can see that in the Mediterranean Sea, we have increased background seismicity, and on other areas in the country, the background seismicity is more sparse. And so the next thing we can do is characterize these clusters. And there are two main types of clusters, normal clusters and abnormal clusters. And according to Booth law, we can classify clusters based on the magnitude difference between the main shock and the largest aftershock. If the difference between the main shock and the largest aftershock is larger than 1, the cluster is considered normal. And if it is smaller than 1, the cluster is considered abnormal or a swarm. And so here we can see two examples for two different sequences. We have the sequence that occurred on the Sea of Galilee in 2018 and the sequence that occurred in the Dead Sea Basin in 2004. And we can see here that the largest event, the magnitude between the largest event and the largest aftershocks is approximately 0.5. On the other hand, the magnitude difference between the main shock and the largest aftershock in the southern sequence is approximately 1. And so we have here an example for abnormal behavior and normal behavior. And why is it interesting? Because this classification may suggest the underlying mechanism that causes and triggers these clusters. Normal behavior is mainly associated with tectonic failure, and abnormal behavior is usually associated with migration of fluids or with seismic creep. So here are examples for sequences. We have here the normal sequences where we see clear main shock and smaller aftershocks. And here we can see sequences with events that have similar magnitude. And I already note that all examples for normal sequences are from the Dead Sea Basin. And so at this stage I have the map and the cluster classification. And so swarms are in red and typical sequences are in blue. And we have here another type, doublets and triplets, which are sequences with 2 or 3 main shocks. And at this stage, I want to compare the nature of seismicity of each structure of the plate boundary. So I divided here the plate boundary into 3 segments, where each one represents distinct structure. We have the localized Arava fault here on the south, the Dead Sea Basin in the central part, and the northern part, which is known for its significant branching and the decreased motion rate. And so these are clusters that I show you clusters that are only located within the seismogenic width because I want to concentrate on the plate boundary. And so at this stage, I also work above the magnitude of completeness in order to work with a complete catalog. So I have this picture now, and the percentage of the type classification, and we can see that the activity that dominates the northern segments is swarm activity. Also in the southern, on the southern segments, most clusters are swarms. In the central segment, we have more normal clusters. Another thing that I see here are areas that have very sparse activity. We can even see it clearer when looking at the event number per kilometer. So we see here the clusters activity, and we have these areas that have 0 to 1 events. So these are very quiet zones, and we can see that they are way below the standard deviation, which is 22. So according to this, I marked seismic gaps along the Dead Sea plate boundary. And it's important to note that Sharon et al. In 2020 marked quiet zones that overlap our gaps also. So we have consistency in the works. And so at this stage, we have a very detailed picture of seismicity along the plate boundary. And what we notice is that swarms occur on the edges of quiet zones. And at this stage, we wanted to understand what is the relationship between quiet areas and swarms. And so we went to the literature, and we found this very classic and basic paper by Mogi that showed that swarms accumulated on the edges of the gap in Lake Baikal, and after a while, with dependence on the tectonic cycle, a main shock occurred on the center of the gap. We looked also for newer study, and we found this study that focused on the Noto earthquake in 2024. And this study also shows that swarm activity took place on the edges of this asperity patch that was eventually ruptured by this main shock, triggering this large event. And so, while we do not suggest the mechanism in our work, we do point at an important observation that identifies areas that may host future potential rupture. And so, to conclude, a high tendency of swarm activity is observed in the northern segment of the plate boundary compared with main shock aftershock sequences in the Dead Sea Basin. And swarms highlight the edges of seismicity gaps all along the plate boundary, and this, I think, is the main message here. And so I presented several seismological characteristics of the Dead Sea Fault, and now I would like to examine the strength of the fault. And so the last question is, can we identify variations in the fault strength based on seismicity pattern? And so I use here the term fault susceptibility, and I would like to explain it. So on 2010, Van der Els and Emily Brodsky investigated the response of the San Andreas system to large remote earthquakes. And they examined the change in earthquake rate that was followed by these large events. In this study, they introduced this relationship, which is inverse, and it suggests that if a fault is highly triggered, then its fault strength is reduced, and it is critically stressed and closer to failure. So based on this idea, they generated this susceptibility map that kind of predicts where areas are more likely to be triggered following large events. So it was already shown that the large earthquakes in Turkey in 2023 triggered increased seismicity also along the Dead Sea Fault. And we can see it here on the timeline. This is the day before the large events and the 3 days after. We have here the latitude and the Y scale with alignment to the map. And we can see here the Turkish catalog in red and the large events. And so we can see sharp increase in activity and the sparse activity before. And also in the Dead Sea Fault, we see increased activity. However, this activity occurs 2.5 days after, or 2 days after these large events. So we ask here, is this really the picture, or are we missing data here? And so in this point, I would like to say a word about our data set and our region. The Dead Sea plate boundary is a slow slipping plate boundary. Its motion rate is 5 millimeters a year, and as a result, the largest event recorded inside the network is 5.2. As a result, the catalog is bounded between the magnitude of completeness and this event, this largest event. Events that are larger than 6 occurs, according to studies, once in every 100 years. So as a result, our data set is relatively limited. Just for reference, the San Andreas Fault has catalogs that includes 4 to 5 magnitude units with dependence on the area. And so we cannot generate large events. However, we can improve detection. So here I want to say a word about microseismicity. So microseismicity is always very significant because it's the most frequent activity we have. However, in our area, it's sometimes the only available data we have, these micro events that are below 2. So it is very important, however challenging, because detecting micro-events, it requires sensitive stations and a dense network. Luckily, in recent years, deep learning algorithms became available almost in every field, also in seismology, and we took advantage of this. We took raw seismic data from the Geological Survey, activated a PhaseNet algorithm, which its output is P&S time arrivals. And after we got the peaks at this stage, we activated another algorithm that associates the peaks and generate a catalog. And at this stage, we get also location. The algorithm locates the events. So after these two stages, we already have a new catalog. However, we did another quality control. We filtered P&S times that probabilities lower than 0.3. We filtered out events that have less than 6 peaks. This is an important step. We cross-reference the new catalog with the GSI explosion list, because explosions also have P&S, so PhaseNet detected lots of explosions. And last, we sampled significant amount and checked it manually by one and looked at the events. And these are examples for new events that are not included in the standard catalog. We can see here events that occurred on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. We estimated its magnitude based on peak ground acceleration and its location. And we can see that it's not even that small, it's a 2. And so this is one example. We have another smaller event. And this is actually the first event that occurred along the Dead Sea Fault that was detected by PhaseNet that occurred after the large event in Turkey. And this is another very small event that occurred on the Arava Fault and was recorded by 3 stations. So, so these were examples. And when I activated PhaseNet on a relatively long time period, but I found that the increased seismicity following the large event spanned 2 months. So I focused on a 4-month period, 2 months before and 2 months with the anomaly here. And so this was the standard catalog, 4 months, and this is the new catalog I generated using PhaseNet algorithm. This catalog includes 7 times more events than the standard catalog. And so I began with asking if we missed a response when we looked at events that are larger than 2. So the answer is we did. When looking at the new data set, in blue, we see an obvious response, an increase in microseismic events that is followed almost immediately the large event. And so we can see also in the cumulative count of events, the sharp increase that we see in the Turkish catalog is correlated with a sharp increase also in the new catalog. And we don't see such increase at all in the standard catalog. So this information does not yet explain this delayed seismicity, larger seismicity here. However, this dataset may help us understand the process here and maybe may suggest some kind of cascading mechanism, and these have to be further investigated. So this is the response, forgot to show. And so now that I have this high resolution catalog, I can generate a high resolution susceptibility map. And so based on the idea I showed before, I generated susceptibility map for the standard catalog. And we can see here that we have this dot on the Faria fault system that really mark a susceptible zone. And when I generate susceptibility map with the new catalog, I can see that this area expands. And another very important thing that I see, that areas that previously were considered as untriggered, such as the Sea of Galilee here, are now have been detected. So they were triggered with microseismic events that we did not recognize. So again, this map somehow even can predict future response of the area. And so we try to explain maybe why these areas are susceptible. And so we have an explanation, an idea for an explanation. And so the Faria fault system is controlled by an extensional stress regime, which reduces the strength of the faults here. However, this is not yet the full answer, because we see here areas that are very susceptible, that the seismicity was highly increased, and they are controlled by completely different stress regime. And so we do not yet know why these areas are weaker and why it is easier to trigger events on them. We think it maybe has something to do with the seismic gaps. And here I show, I think, the picture that kind of sums up the whole study. We can see that gaps remained inactive even when working with microseismicity. And so we have areas here that are very quiet, and they are very hard to trigger. Another compatible observation that we have with the recent study is that areas that showed increased cluster activity are in fact the same susceptible areas that we found in this map. And so I will finish with this figure that shows also the seismogenic width, the seismic gaps, and the susceptible areas of the fault. And to conclude, the seismogenic width provided a specific damage zone associated with the main plate boundary. We applied this measurement on the measurement to investigate variation in the seismicity, finding distinct areas of seismic quiescence. These areas are bounded by swarms and remained inactive for most remote triggering, while others areas showed immediate triggering effect for the large earthquake in Turkey. And so this study is described in these 3 papers. One is currently under review, and I hope you will be able to read it soon. Another was published in February 2025, and this one is in preparation, and I hope we will submit it soon. And so thank you for everyone.
People, I don't know if people in the Zoom can hear me. So people in the Zoom, you can just unmute yourself and ask. Let's try. I hope. So maybe let's start with questions here, and I will write them. Yeah, in the chat. Questions?
For the cluster analysis, the ISM catalog includes mostly magnitude duration until about 2015. They were mostly moment magnitude. Did you use a mixed catalog of magnitudes for the cluster analysis?
I used a catalog which was a TIE generated this catalog, and it has a consistent measurement of, it has moment magnitude, or all events have the same magnitude.
Okay.
And we actually checked this percentage of swarms for different magnitude differences. And we showed that it is consistent with different magnitude difference that varies. So
Yeah.
נסתכל פה אולי.
Cool, yes, please. Can you say, please?
Okay, yes. I don't hear the question, but you can ask.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Okay, that's a very presentation. You showed it, yeah, the swarm are gas swarm in the area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is also susceptible.
Right.
Gas swarm in the eastern Dead Sea, which is not susceptible,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you rather than start on a bit?
So,
Maybe it's a different mechanism or something?
so actually, we do have here two kind of islands that are susceptible also on the eastern side of the Dead Sea Basin. But I think since we have different mechanisms in the Dead Sea Basin and here, so we should see different response also, because as I showed, most of the clusters here are typical. So they are more a result of a tectonic failure, and here something else is generating these events. Maybe something that has to do with creep or pressure. But this is an interesting area, and I think it has to be further investigated.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I ask?
You can ask. Don't see.
Okay. I wonder about the susceptibility. Is it transient or a permanent feature of a certain segment? Because it is defined, if I understood correctly, it was defined by the previous activity of the faulting, but this would change the stress regime. So does it continue to be susceptible after the earthquakes, or it is transient and then the susceptibility moves to another segment?
So this is a good question, and I think the second study kind of laid the base for the study about the response to the Turkish earthquakes, because in the second study, in the clustering analysis, we used a 40 years catalog, and we saw that clusters occur on the Faria Fault on these areas. So these areas were found very active when examining ongoing seismicity, and they were also found active after the large events in Turkey. So these two results are compatible. We have active areas that are also more likely to be triggered following large events.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have a related question on it.
Yes, thanks.
First, I would like to express that it was super interesting and very well presented.
Thank you.
talk,
Thank you very much.
It's very easy to follow, and this is a strong compliment because it implies that the very deep level of understanding is really everything very well thought. So it's super interesting. And I wonder what the implications are of this triggering susceptibility observation for the large breaks that at some point will happen? Do you expect the areas that are more susceptible to seismicity triggering, is that where the big ones are going to happen, or is that where they're not going to happen?
So my answer is yes, I'm pretty sure that, and I'm not the first one who says this, Emily Brodsky wrote it too, but this susceptibility map kind of gives us prediction. I'm pretty sure that following large events, we are expected to see elevated seismicity in these areas. And these are not large events, what we expect. These are small events. So it is not necessarily, related to seismic hazard, but yes, I expect these areas to be more susceptible. And one of, I think, the main reason for this is that these areas are weaker. They're not dependent on the orientation. We have here completely different orientation of the faults. So the response is not dependent on the orientation or on the area. We just have areas that their strength is reduced. So this is, but I hope I'm right. I say it very confident.
Part of my question was motivated by fault activation experiments that showed that and this may be a different setting, but in deep underground, we observed that if we activate a fault with fluid injections, that we often have the biggest quakes where we don't see a lot of seismicity. And do you think this could be an analogy to, for example, the situation in the San Andreas fault that you discussed, where you have seismicity all over the place, but very little on the actual fault where we think the really big ones may not happen. So I'm curious how this will play out in the Dead Sea fault.
So, like, if the energy is released, we expect maybe the fault to be more stable afterwards. So, I got it right? Sorry, I didn't get maybe the...
I just think it's something else whether or not the fault is susceptible to producing more microseismicity or small quakes, and therefore you don't have high seismicity rates, and whether it's prone to producing lots of big events. Those two things could require different properties.
Yes,
something that's
right.
very locked may not produce a lot of seismicity, but maybe part of the fault that ruptures in the 1906 quake that at some point will happen.
Yes, I do think that these areas, the gaps areas, may present areas that will host such potential rupture. But I think I didn't really touch mechanism in my work, and I kind of showed general observations, and I find the long catalog, the correlation between the long catalog analysis and the short one to be kind of convincing. But I think the mechanism has to be further investigated, and we do need to focus on areas and understand why they're more susceptible and what will be their response in future events. So.
Thank you.
Actually, I have two questions, if I may. First of all, thank you very much for this remarks. Now, the first question, don't you think your catalog here is biased due to there is more activity in the north than in the south, and therefore your susceptibility map is biased, where you have more data in the north and less data in the south? This is the first question. And also, don't you think it's biased by normal faulting and not, well, it highlights areas with normal faulting and not only structurally faulting and actually more normal faulting than structurally faulting. Maybe it's related to the location of the stress change, the dynamic stress change. So this is the first question. And second, can you explain to me how do you have seismic gap in, I think it's the Jericho fault, where we had the 1927 earthquake?
Fault here. Yes, but this earthquake was here.
No, it's not.
No?
What rupture the fault there?
It was here?
A little bit south.
No, but look where the yellow area is. Here.
You say it was here.
Yeah, also here.
Okay, I have to. Amir, so what was the location? What?
It's in the north Dead Sea.
So here. This is what I
So
remember.
the Jericho fault, even the southern Jericho fault was not ruptured?
Actually,
Can you actually say?
so we can see it here. I will go back to the clusters, but so I have it here. This was the large event, and north to it we have this gap. And actually, Amir and Itai and Adam deployed a dense station right here in order to look for micro events, and they didn't find any. And so it kind of correlates with my observation here.
But then it's not a gap, it's quite.
It's quiet zone, but gap is the definition of it, as I know, is areas that are not ruptured for a long time, or that are likely to be ruptured, but our tectonic cycle is quite long, so it was ruptured maybe, but we do not know, and right now we do not see any activity which may suggest that it may host significant rupture. And regarding so now I have to go back to the susceptibility map. But regarding your first question, so actually we have this area presented significant increase, and this is the southern segment and the furthest from the hypocenters. So I don't think there is bias here. I think this area is indeed very active, and it may have something to do with the type of faulting. But I think these also you see it with the motion rate. The motion shifts. It's no.
I'm listening. I'm just listening.
So I think seismicity kind of translates the motion rate shift. So we see the motion here, and we have here this complex area that is more susceptible, maybe due to the extension. But the extension does not yet explain these areas.
Off the map, you have all hell breaking loose in the frontier line.
Yes. Yes, that's true. I focused on the network, and so these events are outside of the network. So actually, a lot is kind of my older area of research. So I neglected it here.
There are still people in the Zoom that
Okay.
want to ask questions. So,
Yes, I have a question.
Can. Yes.
Excellent, very interesting talk. My question is regarding an area that is not on the map, but is very close to the end of the map, and it is the 1995 earthquake in the Gulf, which was preceded by several storms at the margin of the basin in the Gulf. Did you look at that? Did you try to pay attention to the relation? It's related to a question that was asked before, to the relation between the swarm and the following earthquake, the swarms and the following earthquake.
So we talk about the 1995. So yes, Yariv asked me the exact same question in the seminar, in the geological survey. So I filtered out main shocks that occurred outside of the network, but I saw the cluster because I activated the clustering algorithm on the full catalog. I filtered it afterwards in this polygon, but me and Nadav actually, we started to look at the response in the area that followed the large event. It was 6.3, I think. 7.2, okay. And so we found several events that occurred in the Faria following this large event also. We presented it in the paper. However, it is important to note that the network was much sparser. So we have even more limited data sets before 2018, and this is even before 20 kilo alpine. This occurred in the 90s. So, but now that we are working on this, on the response to the Turkish events, we did talk about understanding response to other large events, and I think this will be the next step, maybe.
Your cluster type classification shows, oh, sorry, this. Your cluster type classification shows correlation with the Dead Sea, and very, my knowledge on the regional tectonics is very poor, but does this suggest an underlying tectonic reason for the types of clusters that you observe in the geographic distribution?
So right now we have only this general reason that maybe the mechanism in the Dead Sea Basin involves just tectonic failure, and maybe the swarms occur due to the location on the edges of the gaps, which are these transition areas between an asperity and the rest of the fault, and so they have higher stress. But for now we have this observation, and we do not go in detail after the mechanisms. So I hope it answers.
It's an interesting topic. I'm curious. I just wonder what the Dead Sea fault is, where it is, and how that would relate to
Relate to what? Sorry.
The seismic behavior of the fault population that you have. It's occurred, in the northern and southern segment of the so more swarms, and in the central segment, pretty much outlines the Dead Sea. You have more of the normal cluster.
Yes.
Whether that's a coincidence or if there's an underlying tectonic or fault reason for this.
So yeah, I think it's due to different mechanism. I think the Dead Sea shows us more clear main shocks because its underlying mechanism is different. But in order to really understand the mechanism, we have to go into each cluster and focus and perform a focused study.
So So,
I just wanted to note here, sorry, Menandrin, I just wanted to note that we could not perform Omori, we did not fit Omori law here because we did not have enough events. But maybe with the new catalog, we will have enough events to perform also to understand how it decays, if it decays according to Omori law, and also give another angle to the characterization of these clusters.
we have to finish. One more question. One more question.
Sorry.
Okay.
Did you try to look at the clusters and the background seismicity in the sense of how deep the depth? I mean, did you see that when you can see it in one of your figures that when you go to the Dead Sea Basin, which is much deeper, you don't get any clusters at all. And when you go to the sides and you have all sorts of changes in the seismogenic depth, and it becomes more shallow, you do see the clusters. So did you think about it? Did it come in some way into considerations?
First of all, yeah, we talked about it yesterday, but actually one of the challenging things about the southern segments, which do present many clusters, is that they do occur at deep, yes. And so we want to find this feature, these events are shallower, so it explains the swarms, but it does not explain the swarms in the southern segment. And it may be because there is different mechanism in the northern swarms and in the southern ones. So, and also in the northern segment, the gap is more quiet. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.